Hello, my name's Lesley Atherton, and this is a short story called What Is It? The little girl rushed in, squealing with excitement. What's going on? Caroline asked, smiling fondly at her usually serious granddaughter. The squeals continued. I don't know what it is, Grandma, said the girl, but it looks so odd. What do you think it is? How could Caroline answer if her granddaughter hadn't brought the object in? Behind her back, the face of Ben, the girl's darling red-headed brother, appeared. You should see it, Grandma, he said, his cheeks grubby and stuffed with biscuits. Do you know what it is? We've been digging holes with it, but I don't think that's right. Solly was saying it's a trap, like for bears or dogs or crocodiles, but I'm sure that's not right either. What do you reckon, Grandma? He asked again. Realising Caroline hadn't seen their treasure yet, Ben shuffled and cleared his throat. Then, with great dramatic emphasis, he shuffled a weird metal object from behind his back and presented it to his grandma. Nothing special to look at. It was crusted with soil from the digging and was almost entirely covered in puckered, pitted rust. Caroline examined it carefully, and not only for the kids' sake. She'd lived in this house for over 30 years, and it didn't look like anything that had fallen off any machinery she owned. As an active and interested grandma, Caroline was accustomed to being presented with objects by her two adventure-loving grandchildren. They explored every blade of grass in her wild and massive garden, and she encouraged them, knowing that they could play safely in a place of very few hazards. But she didn't think this metal thing had come from her garden at all. It was a little worrying because, quite apart from anything else, it was a potential hazard with its pointed, rusting spikes. What is it? Said Ben. It was the third time the question had been asked in less than a minute. Caroline had no idea and turned it over in her hands. We probably should clean it up, see how it moves and what it does, but at the moment I've no idea. The children, bored now of the mysterious object, left the room and ran to the living room for an indoor break. The television was switched on and immediately blared out a theme tune their grandma knew too well. They'd be quiet for at least another 20 minutes. Caroline shut the living room door as she passed. Caroline was bored too, and was especially bored of making cakes. When faced with such domestic challenges, her boredom emerged quickly. It was a family trait, and this indicated that she needed a distraction, and quickly. She ran upstairs to find her half-used bottle of baby oil. It had seen better days, its label peeling and its surfaces greasy and sticky, but would still be useful. She took it downstairs with the intention of using the oil to loosen the mysterious contraption up a little, perhaps even to clean it. Ben shouted something about life being unfair. His sister objected in a high-pitched whine. Caroline rolled her eyes and shouted back, pushing herself into their argument in the desire for speedy resolution and calm. Give it a break, you two. Tell me, where did you find this? A shout came through to her. Under the tree. I think it is a sycamore tree, the big old one. It was just lying on top of the leaves. That was odd. Caroline had noticed, of course, that the leaves were falling, but the area under the sycamore tree had been cleared by her only the day before, and there had been no sign of any metal device. Any other person might have been concerned, an item this large under her tree and appearing for no reason. But Caroline, mother of three, grandma of three, and intrepid go-kart builder in her youth, had a robust love of adventure and an even stronger desire to find answers. She screwed her feet into her wellies at the back door and trudged down the garden to the sycamore. They'd bought the house because of its enormous, safe, private garden, but she had to admit that now she was a widow, it was getting a little too much for her. The garden especially was a trial and too much of a responsibility. Her ankles sunk a little in the damp grass, and she made a mental note to call someone to deal with the drainage. It took a few moments to reach the tree. In the autumnal half-light, Caroline was comforted by the steady grandeur of her favourite sycamore. To her it had always symbolised protection and love of the ancient ways, as would a relic of the old gods, reassuring and ancient, though dangerous and fierce when crossed. She had never felt anything but happy sitting under this tree on a picnic blanket with her husband, with her children, and later the grandchildren. This time, though, as she approached the tree, it seemed that something had changed. It appeared to shudder slightly, only slightly, but enough for her to notice. It couldn't have been the wind or a trick of the fading light. The tree did shudder, and as it shuddered, she noted metal objects falling from it. They created a small stash on the ground. That was peculiar. Was she going senile, having visions? She picked up one of the objects and immediately dropped it. It felt strange, unworldly or even sinister. It was cold, yet had burned her and stained her hand. The biggest part of Caroline's sensibility was telling her to go inside, ordering her, in fact. But though each and every one of her inner voices and self-protection mechanisms told her the same, she simply couldn't tear herself away from the tree. As she stood in the garden, the sycamore's shade took on previously unnoticed significance. The clouds had darkened to near black in places, in other places pale blue-grey, and the shades of tangerine, slate, lemon and blue now shone brightly between them. The tree appeared to be taking light from the sky. That was the only way Caroline could describe it, feeding from the sky. She laughed nervously at herself for making such a peculiar assumption, but that clearly seemed to be what was happening. But how would a tree do that? And why had the atmosphere changed so dramatically as she had approached the tree and noticed the object's fall? Caroline wasn't sure, but all of a sudden she felt an enormous concern for her grandchildren. Ben and Sally had been playing in this very place. She could see the polythene wrappers from their drink cartons on the ground, little outs. Surely the children would have felt this odd atmosphere. Caroline reached down and picked up a small piece of blackened metal and ran back to the house. She needed to check on the children. They were watching a DVD, their interest in the television's usual offerings having waned. All was well indoors. Despite the coldness of the object in her hand, Caroline felt too warm with the heat that was emanating from the object, and she placed the metal thing alongside the other one on the kitchen table, but immediately wished that she hadn't. Was it her imagination messing about with her, or had the two pieces moved closer to each other and somehow linked together? And was it dangerous that they had? She tried, but her hands were now incapable of moving the objects apart. In her fear she grabbed both, one in each hand, and ran as best she was able to, back into her garden. Oh my God! Under the sycamore tree a construction was taking place. Metal pieces, each intricately and purposefully designed, that had quickly become apparent, still fell from its branches now with an increasing regularity, then moved and blended. Those pieces, without any outside assistance, were transitioning into a quite unique creation. It didn't seem unusual anymore, or dangerous. In fact, it was more of a birth than a supernatural occurrence. Caroline watched the pieces shower from the tree. There was a large one, a red-painted piece which looked like the side panel from a car, then foam rubber, leather, circles, squares, and many, many shapes and sizes. And then it stopped. "Grandma," a deep voice said. "Don't panic, it's only me, Ben." But Ben was in the living room, watching a superhero cartoon on DVD. "Take a look at it, it's my creation. I made a time modulator. I came back to see you. I came to warn you about the tree. If you don't get it felled soon, it will kill you." Caroline looked deep into the eyes of her grandson and nodded. He had turned, or would turn into, a handsome man. Sweet-natured, clever and handsome, grey-haired too, but he was unmistakably Ben. "I have to go. I've always loved you, don't forget." Caroline nodded. The man smiled and blew her a kiss, then got into the time machine and was gone. Caroline ran back into the house. "Kids, let's go to the park, but I'm going to phone the tree surgeon first." He agreed to visit and assess the sycamore the following day. Caroline was relieved as she encouraged the kids into their outdoor shoes once more. She felt special and privileged, though also a little bit crazy. How many people received a message from their future? Sure, she'd die one day, but if she did what Ben said, she might get a chance to meet other grandchildren, meet another man, know her own grandkids as adults or whatever. That would be wonderful. Ben looked wonderful. Fancy coming all this way or all this time just to speak to his grandma. That was very special. And of course the old hollow sycamore had to go. It didn't matter that it had been planted by Caroline and her husband on the day they moved in. Already a mature tree, it had required heavy machinery to replant. The point was that it had started dying on the day that her husband had finished dying. In order to complete her mourning and to keep her alive, the tree must go. But as Caroline helped little Sally on with her wellies, she realised with a shock that she was holding a tiny bolt in her hand. It must have been from the time modulator. She said a little prayer that her grandson would stay safe on his way back home.